The lights inside the Capitol seemed brighter than usual, almost like they knew something was about to break. It was a cold, gray February afternoon in Washington. Outside, protesters lined the barricades, waving signs about freedom, about truth, about betrayal. Inside, the chamber was packed for a rare joint session on national unity and party loyalty. Cameras hovered like hawks. Every seat was filled. Tension cracked between lawmakers like dry branches under weight. Vice President JD Vance took the floor, polished and sharp in a gray-blue suit. His words were slow, calculated, a scalpel meant to cut one person, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. "She speaks of justice," he said, voice raised, "but sides with those who disrespect our flag and tear down the foundation of this republic. Is that loyalty? Or is it ideology over country?" The room hushed. Eyes turned toward her. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. Dressed in royal blue, back straight, hands folded, she locked eyes with Vance and didn't blink. She didn't rise. She didn't even speak. She simply reached into her folder and pulled out a remote. The silence was no longer quiet. It was thick, waiting for something. And then, the screen behind her flickered on. The video was grainy, a hidden cam from 2021, but the voice was unmistakably JD Vance. He was standing in a gold-lit ballroom, glass in hand, shoulders tense. The clip was short, damning. "If I don't get President Trump's support," Vance said, eyes darting, "I'm done. He's the only one who can save my campaign. I need him more than anyone knows." Gasps hit the air like thunder. Senators looked at one another. Reporters scrambled with their phones. Even a few of Vance's own party members shifted uncomfortably. Jasmine finally stood. She looked at Vance, then at the room. "You questioned my loyalty, but loyalty without self-respect isn't patriotism. It's desperation." Her voice was calm. No yelling, no theatrics. But the words hit harder than any raised voice ever could. Vance opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His face reddened. His hands clenched the podium. Crockett didn't gloat. She sat back down, folded her hands again. She had nothing more to prove. The chamber didn't erupt. It didn't applaud. It just sat in the heavy silence of truth. Outside, protesters stopped chanting. Inside, the air felt like it had changed. Something had been cracked open. Something that couldn't be closed again. That night, every news outlet in the country aired the clip. Some tried to spin it. Others tried to bury it. But most just played it straight, over and over again. Jasmine Crockett didn't do interviews. She didn't post a tweet. She went home to her modest apartment just 3 blocks from Howard University, where she once taught part-time and where she still mentored young black girls on Saturdays. Her phone rang endlessly. She didn't answer. She just sat at her kitchen table, staring at the folder that had held the remote. Her mother's photo sat near the stove, always watching, always reminding. Back in 2021, when that video had come to her through a scared young staffer, she didn't rush to use it. She tucked it away. She waited for the moment it would mean something deeper than revenge. And now, it had. Her staff begged her to celebrate. But Jasmine wasn't celebrating, because this wasn't about her. It was about something much older, much heavier, the kind of betrayal that black women in power have always had to stand quietly against. She didn't cry, not yet, but something in her heart felt like it was cracking wide open. At 2:17 a.m., Jasmine finally allowed herself to exhale. The chamber was quiet now. The streets outside had emptied. The noise was gone, but the weight stayed. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a small leather journal. It was old, faded, frayed at the corners. Inside were letters, not official ones, handwritten ones. Notes her mother used to leave in her lunchbox, and some Jasmine had written back. One caught her eye. If they call you angry, be calm. If they call you weak, be steel. But never forget who you are. Mama. Tears welled. This was the same mother who had marched alone in Texas during the redistricting crisis, who had once sat outside a courthouse for 6 hours so her daughter could testify without fear. Jasmine hadn't told anyone this, but that moment with Vance brought her back to the last time she saw her mother cry. Not from pain, from pride. It was the day Jasmine won her first court case. She wasn't even 26. Tonight wasn't just about politics. It was about every woman who was ever told to sit down, be quiet, and accept less. And Jasmine was done accepting less. Back in 2021, the ballroom was buzzing with champagne and secrets. JD Vance thought it was a safe room, a place where powerful men could speak freely, laugh off lies, and make backdoor promises. But behind the buffet table, unnoticed in a black vest, stood someone who had once believed in him, a 24-year-old political intern named Marcus. Marcus had joined Vance's campaign thinking it was about values. But the deeper he got, the more he saw desperation dressed as principle. That night, he watched Vance beg for Trump's support with shaking hands and hollow eyes, and something in Marcus shattered. He didn't plan to record the moment, but his phone was in his apron pocket. When Vance leaned too close to the wrong person, the mic picked it all up. For a year, Marcus didn't know what to do. He was scared, terrified of losing everything. Then one day, while volunteering at a youth town hall, he heard Jasmine speak. She didn't preach. She didn't pose. She just told the truth. And Marcus knew what to do. He sent the clip, anonymously, in a yellow envelope with only 5 words. You'll know when it's time. The morning after the video aired, Jasmine walked into the Capitol through the south entrance just like always. No cameras, no fuss. But this time, the hallway froze. Colleagues who once brushed past her now stared. Some nodded silently, others looked away. And then came Senator Rhodes, an old-school conservative with a booming voice and a proud handshake. He stepped directly into her path. You embarrassed the vice president on national television, he growled. Jasmine looked up, calm, measured. I revealed the truth. He embarrassed himself. Rhodes leaned closer. You don't get to play hero. You don't belong in these chambers. That's when it happened. A quiet voice behind them, soft but firm. She belongs more than most of us ever did. It was Congresswoman Martinez, a Latina war veteran who rarely spoke on the record. She walked forward, placed a hand on Jasmine's shoulder, and met Rhodes's stare. You fear her because she didn't bow, Martinez added. Get out of her way. Jasmine didn't smile. She just kept walking. But in her heart, something stirred. Not victory, not pride. Solidarity. The kind that forms when truth cuts deep enough for others to finally stand beside you. The snow had started to fall again. Jasmine sat by the window of her office, watching it blanket the Capitol grounds in white silence. Her assistant, Brielle, came in holding a plain envelope. No return address, just her name in neat handwriting. Inside was a letter. Congresswoman Crockett. I'm 73. I've never written a lawmaker in my life. But I watched what you did. I cried through the night. Not because you hurt anyone, but because you reminded me of who I was when I still believed in America. My husband served in Vietnam. My son died in Iraq. I've seen flags folded. I've heard the lies. But I never saw anyone call them out with grace until you did. You didn't yell. You didn't strike back. You stood like my mother used to, quiet, firm, unshaken. And in that silence, you spoke for us all. Thank you. Marjorie H., Indiana. Jasmine pressed the letter to her chest. For the first time since the chamber erupted, tears came. Not from sadness, from the overwhelming weight of being seen. By the third day, JD Vance was nowhere to be seen. His office gave vague statements. He's meeting with key allies. He's traveling. He'll be back soon. But Washington knew better. He had gone quiet. Cable news hosts argued over his fate. Some called for his resignation. Others attacked Jasmine, accusing her of weaponizing shame. But the people were speaking louder than all of them. Hundreds of thousands reposted the video. Artists sketched Jasmine's silhouette standing alone under the Capitol seal. Students reenacted the moment in classrooms. Veterans shared it in Facebook groups with the words, "Finally, someone stood up without backing down." Behind the scenes, Vance's staff was panicking. The fundraiser who hosted that infamous night pulled his support. 2 donors withdrew. Leaked emails hinted that even his inner circle was splitting. But the most damning blow came when a former speechwriter tweeted, "We used to laugh at people like Jasmine, but she just gave the kind of speech we always tried to fake, and she didn't even have to write it down." Vance didn't respond. He didn't dare. He wasn't just losing the argument. He was losing the illusion. That Friday, Jasmine slipped out of the Capitol before sundown. No motorcade. No press. She had somewhere important to be. In Southeast D.C., in a worn-down church basement, 12 girls waited. They were part of the community program she'd started years ago, the night school. A place where young black girls learned about power, about justice, about their worth. They weren't just students. They were her why. Jasmine walked in to applause, not from pity or celebrity, but from pride. One girl, Amaya, no older than 10, raised her hand. "Did it scare you?" she asked. Jasmine knelt beside her. "Yes," she said. "It scared me a lot." "Then why did you do it?" Jasmine paused. Her voice cracked. "Because sometimes, baby, being scared is the only proof that it's worth it." The room went still. Amaya nodded slowly, then hugged her. Jasmine held her tightly. She felt something shift in that moment, like she was no longer carrying the burden alone. When she left that night, the wind had picked up. Snowflakes danced in the streetlights, and for the first time in a long while, she smiled. On Saturday morning, Jasmine flew home to Texas for the first time in months. No press announcement, no political rally, just quiet. She arrived at her childhood home, a small, sun-worn house with creaky steps and a porch swing that hadn't moved since her mother passed. The yard was overgrown, the fence leaning. But it still smelled like family, and someone was sitting on the porch. It was her father. They hadn't spoken in 5 years, not since the day she stood on the courthouse steps and called out corruption in the sheriff's department, where he had once worked as a deputy. He hadn't forgiven her, but there he sat, head low, wrinkled hands in his lap. "I watched the video," he said without looking up. "Your mama would have called that a holy kind of silence." Jasmine didn't answer. He looked up. "I was wrong," he whispered. "All those years I told you to be quiet, stay small. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just scared." A tear slid down his cheek. He opened his arms, and for the first time in nearly a decade, Jasmine let herself be held by the man who once couldn't see her. That night, Jasmine lay on the old couch in the living room, wrapped in the same quilt her mother had sewn in '93. The air smelled of cedar and old prayers. She reached into the bookshelf and pulled out a battered journal. Her mama's. She hadn't been able to open it since the funeral. Inside was a note tucked between the pages, dated 2 days before her mother's stroke. "Baby girl, if this world ever tries to dim your light, I need you to remember who you are. They'll call your silence dangerous. They'll call your fire too loud. But never forget, your voice doesn't come from your throat. It comes from your roots, from women who never got the mic. You carry their names every time you stand up. When you feel alone, close your eyes. I'm right beside you, always. Mama. The page crinkled in her hands as tears fell, heavy, unfiltered, silent. She hadn't realized how much she still needed her mother's voice. And now, somehow, she had it again. Back in D.C., Jasmine received an email marked urgent. Subject: private invitation, Reppers Carter Memorial Service. She froze. Congressman Gerald Carter had passed, the same man who once mentored her when no one else would, who had shielded her from political wolves when she first entered Congress, who used to call her Storm, because she always showed up with thunder. They hadn't spoken in months. He'd fallen silent after a stroke, and she'd been too busy to visit, too consumed by votes, cameras, fights. She hadn't said goodbye. At the memorial, the chapel was filled with people who hadn't known his middle name, hadn't heard the way he used to hum when he read bills out loud. But Jasmine had. As they lowered his casket into the ground, she stepped forward. The air was thick with winter. She whispered, "Thank you for holding the line before I knew how." A little girl nearby clutched her mother's hand. "Mom," she asked, "is that the woman from the video?" The mom nodded. "Yes, that's the one who stood alone." Jasmine turned, knelt down, and smiled softly. "No, sweetheart," she said, eyes glistening. "I never stood alone. I just stood first." The silence didn't last. It never does when power feels threatened. A week after Jasmine's return from Texas, whispers turned into headlines. Not real scandals. Manufactured ones. Anonymous sources claimed she had staged the moment with the Vance video. Old court documents from dismissed cases were being dredged up. Fox News ran a special titled, "Jasmine Crockett, Truth Teller or Political Actor?" Her staff was overwhelmed. Death threats trickled in. One even mentioned Amaya by name, the little girl from night school. Jasmine sat alone in her office, lights off. For a moment she felt the weight pressing in again, heavier this time, meaner. And then her phone lit up with a text. From Marcus, the staffer who sent the tape. "They're scared of you. That means you're still dangerous to the lie." She read it twice, and she smiled, not because it made things easier, but because it reminded her, "You're not fighting to be liked. You're fighting to be heard." The storm was coming again, and this time, she'd walk into it head high. CNN announced it with drama. Live national town hall, JD Vance versus Jasmine Crockett, a conversation on unity. Jasmine didn't flinch when the invitation came. Her team begged her to decline. "They want a viral moment," one warned. "They want you to crack." She looked up, calm as ever. "Then let them watch me, not crack." The stage was set in Ohio, Vance's home state. Red carpet, bright lights, a roaring crowd stacked with supporters. Jasmine entered in white, pure, quiet, unshakable. The moderator tried to bait her with fire, asked her if she hated America, if she believed in law and order. She answered every question with the kind of patience only pain can teach. Then Vance leaned forward. "Miss Crockett, I think you owe the American people an apology for using a personal video to humiliate me." The room tensed. Jasmine leaned forward too. "No, Mr. Vice President. What I owe them is honesty, even when it hurts, even when it's you." A silence thicker than applause followed. She looked at the camera, straight into millions of homes, and said, "Unity without truth is just quiet corruption." And the country felt that line like a thunderclap. That night, after the town hall, Jasmine's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then picked up. A slow, raspy voice greeted her. "Congresswoman Crockett, This is Mrs. Lyles, your 8th grade teacher. Jasmine froze. I saw you tonight, Mrs. Lyles said, voice cracking. I cried, Jasmine. I watched that scared girl who once stayed after school because she was too afraid to go home become the woman who told a vice president the truth on national TV. Jasmine's throat tightened. You don't remember, do you? The teacher continued. The day you stayed after class and asked if girls like you could ever be president. And I told you yes. I just never knew I'd live long enough to see you prove me right. Tears streamed silently down Jasmine's face. She sat on the edge of her hotel bed, unable to speak. You made me proud, baby. You made so many of us proud tonight. Don't stop. The call ended, but Jasmine sat there for another hour, holding the silence because for once it didn't feel heavy, it felt like home. March 1st. The House was packed tighter than usual. A final vote was scheduled on the Liberty Restoration Act, a sweeping bill that would reshape voting rights, criminal justice reform, and campaign transparency. Jasmine had poured her soul into it. But now, after the backlash, some of her own allies were wavering. The whispers were loud again. Too risky. Too much change. Not the right time. Jasmine stood before the House, the bill clutched in her hand. I've been told I'm too loud, too black, too proud, too much. She paused, her voice soft, shaking slightly. But this bill isn't mine. It's for the girl who still walks 3 miles to a polling place in Georgia. The man still sitting in prison because he couldn't afford bail. The families drowning under political lies dressed up as unity. She looked around. I won't beg for your vote, but I will remember how each of you stood when truth asked something hard of you. And then she sat. The chamber stood in stunned silence. One by one, hands rose. The bill passed by a single vote, and Jasmine didn't cry, not yet. Later that evening, Jasmine stood alone, waiting for the Capitol elevator. The doors opened. Inside stood JD Vance. They hadn't spoken since the town hall. He looked smaller, not physically, but the kind of small that comes after truth carves you out from the inside. He didn't say anything at first, but as the elevator hummed downward, he finally whispered, You could have destroyed me. She didn't look at him. I didn't have to, she replied. You did that when you stopped believing in anything except power. He sighed. I used to believe in something. She turned now, eyes firm. Then go find that man again. The one before the fear made you hollow. The elevator dinged. She stepped out. But before the doors closed behind her, she turned back one last time. I don't hate you, JD. I pity you. He stood frozen, not because she insulted him, but because he knew she meant it. 3 days later, Jasmine stood in the House gallery. Below her, kids from across the country sat in the viewing section. One little girl, maybe 9 or 10, caught her eye. She wore a homemade shirt with crooked letters that read, I stand with Jasmine. Jasmine placed a hand over her heart. She saw her younger self in that girl, the one who once asked if girls like me can be president. She saw her mother, her father, Marcus, Mrs. Lyles, and every soul who never had a microphone but still spoke with their lives. Cameras were off. There was no applause, no press, just her and the next generation. The girl waved. Jasmine waved back, slowly, with reverence. Then she whispered to herself, I never stood alone. She turned and walked out of the chamber. No music played, no banners fell. Just a quiet sense that something had changed, not just in Washington, but in the hearts of those who had watched her and wept. If your heart is full, if you felt Jasmine's silence thunder through your soul, if a single line made you cry,
remember someone, or feel seen, please like, not for numbers, but for the message. Please comment. Tell us what moment broke you the most. Please subscribe. Not just to support this channel, but to carry this kind of truth into more hearts, more homes, more voices. Because Jasmine Crockett may be fiction, but the fight she stood for is not. And your voice is the next one the world needs to hear.